Yeah, guys, thank you for having me here. This is a talk I've wanted to give for a really long time. It's been rattling on my head for decades. And when I got the call for speakers to talk here, I was like, this is the perfect venue to debut this talk. So I really can't wait to share it with you. As I said, my name is Sautner. I work for Comcast. I'm a distinguished engineer there. But I'm not, I want to qualify, I'm not calling myself a distinguished person. I'm not working on the way some big tech companies do their engineering levels, usually 1 through 8 or 7, and N7 for Comcast is a distinguished engineer, and 8 is software. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because this is kind of like an origin story, and it's part of the arc that I want to talk about is the middle of my career, where I was working primarily on an open source platform called Nimbits, and which it did become a thing and got some users and gained a lot of traction, became a company called Nimbits Inc. And there was a whole 10-year journey from the birth of that platform to the eventual mothballing. And I'll explain what happened there. And I'm really hoping to have the main takeaway of this talk be why you should have passion projects and why you should have open source passion projects. And when you start a passion project, what's your intention and what do you want to become? And I had a whole journey there. So I'm really excited to share a lot of information with you. I'm going to reset the time here. So the floor is, I was a horrible student in high school, barely graduated high school. I had no idea that I had aptitude for software engineering. Went to college to work on a wolf research team in northern Wisconsin and studied wolves. I got a degree in behavioral psychology. Again, as you know, love computers, love fixing them, love screwing around with them. Did not think that I could ever make a career out of being a software engineer. So it wasn't until I graduated from college I got my first job. It was 1998, so like anybody who said I know how to work a computer would get a job in like Vista. So that was like my first job was doing desktop support. Getting $16 an hour to switch out old token link cards that weren't like to get compliant with 2 Ethernet cards and stuff like that. But I was allowed to eventually start working in these Sunoco chemical plants and refineries. These are these city-sized oil refineries and chemical plants. Got really into process control and automation, and how these sensors work to understand what's happening in the refinery and release pressure on valves and the giant balls of fire shoot out of smokestacks, and I really enjoyed that kind of work. Downside of that is time Sunoco was a Microsoft shop, and my first programming language that I was actually doing professionally was VB.NET. Everybody knows what that is. That's not a good language to get into. Kind of the wrong way. So near the end of my time at Sunoco, like 2 years before I left, I started a open source project called Nimbits, and I'm kind of going through the motivation of what my original motivation for starting Nimbits was. And the idea is while working in the refineries, we work with these giant data acquisition systems and process control systems. And these were all this sensor data was flowing into these proprietary software platforms, and then actually control the different systems. And I asked, can I get one seat of this platform so I could take it home and hook my query up to it? And I wanted to be able to see the same sort of data, so like temperature, flows through my pumps and stuff like that. And they said yes. And I was super excited, got all lined up and ready, and then the salesperson came back and said, no, it's too expensive, too proprietary, you can't have that. And I was like, okay, I'm going to write my own, just to show you, I'm going to do it. And Nimbits was born. So I'm not going to go too deep into what Nimbits was. This is a technical talk about its architecture. This is, again, the speech about its, how it was impacted my career and my art going from somebody who couldn't code and was failing high school to a solution engineering contest. So this is just real quick, this is what it was. You got sensors on one side, I wrote an Arduino client, a Java-based SDK client, and then you could also, and then a Nimbits server, which could run locally on the Ubuntu instance. You have it run locally, and you can do like maybe a local workload and be self-hosted. You could then deploy it to Google Cloud Platform and run it on the cloud. And you could either run it on your own account, or I had a hosted one that you could log into and use instead, and nearly bankrupted because I didn't know how to monetize it. And then finally, the other end pushed it an Android apps and push notifications down to any connected WebSocket and wait for getting notifications out. The guts of Nimbits was data would flow in. There was a rule engine that would maybe filter out noise, so the value was higher or lower than you expected for that sensor. It would say it's rejected. There was a compression engine where you could say only record relevant data. So if you're recording temperatures, you only want to know to a 1 degree variation, and the temperatures coming in were 78.1, 78.2. You can configure to drop those values because they weren't relevant enough to store. Then I wrote a time series database. There was a calculation engine that would, as data would flow in, you could configure calculations to pull the current value of other data points and run a formula and compute something and then send it right back to the pipeline and record it. An example like you want to calculate the dew point, so you're going to take the relative humidity sensor and temperature sensor and maybe send an alarm saying there's a dew point, you're going to moisture somewhere. And then the over engine where you could say something reaches a certain high or low threshold or anything kind of circumstance and send a notification or to some kind of that. So that's what it was. And this is the product that I marketed. I would say that it was in the early 2000s, and IoT was still kind of a growing thing. We were all about cloud computing then. I think it will have a bit of my time, so I'm excited to do about it. So when you're going on a journey to start an open source project, what's one of the big takeaways I want to share it here is what are you trying to build? And are you trying to build the next Google or the next YouTube? Or are you just building a library or an app or something really small, and you want to build your personal brand? You want to share code and be part of this community. Also, a big thing for me was I was desperately trying to learn Java as well as I could because and move into that world. I was excited to see what was happening in mobile. Had a horrible argument with a Microsoft engineer who told me that mobile wasn't built for future mobile, and I said to him, I want to go do Android. The big thing is, do you want to be an entrepreneur and start a business? And really think deeply about, do you want to go down that road of venture capitalism and getting funding, being a founder, hiring people, or do you want to stay in your own little projects and work on your code? I at the time tried to be an entrepreneur. I did form Nimbits Inc. I should have been Nimbits LLC. Incorporating was a giant mistake. Taxes were a mess. Made things way more expensive. It wanted to grow. You do want to make sure that you're going to try to protect your brand as far as something that you're trying to call your product. Make sure your domain names are available. Make sure that there's not another product out there that's similar enough to cause conflict or confusion. Will you use it? And that's so important. Trying to write a project that you think people will like, but it's not part of your everyday experience. You're not using it yourself. You have to use your umbrella for you and build something that's going to be meaningful to you. So you're the power user. You're flushing out bugs. You're making it great. And that was a big thing for me for Nimbits is that I was using it for home automation and control, so every time I would add a new feature. But that's like the first lesson I want to learn is make sure you know what you're trying to build. And if you're an entrepreneur and you're going to start a great company, then we'll probably you. I'm a horrible entrepreneur. I shouldn't have covered if you left alone. I think you want people to even ask you about product. Going completely open source is scary. And when I first got started, people would come in and say, I can't believe your product is free and open source, it's 100% open source, I love that. That's why we're using your platform. And I'm sure like everybody in this room, when you're trying to choose software, open source is a major selling point. So Nimbits was the cloud-based IoT platform of the day that was completely free and open source. That meant though that it was easily copied, it was easily pirated. It was hard to control. That I would find other websites from another country that would just take it, strip it out, and try to sell it, right? And so there's lots of turbulence in doing that. And you'd really be surprised at how hard it is to protect your brand. And then this happened.
Hold it right there!
It's okay. We're not gonna hurt you.
You're not real Care Bears, so who are you?
Oh, they're changing. They look like clouds.
We are clouds. We're Nimbits.
We got lost from our cloud school when we were learning to make weather.
So what?
Protecting your brand is hard. And I never thought the Care Bears would come for me. So yeah, I just want to, I'm looking at my notes every once in a while. I just want to make sure that there was this thought that I think a lot of us might have is that, well, what I'm going to do is take the core of my technology and I'm going to make it proprietary. And it's going to be closed source. And then, and just open source with the fluff around it. And then protect my intellectual property. And I'm essentially going to be like, I'm going to write an NVIDIA driver for Linux, right? And I really want to be that guy. So that was a challenge, it was tempting, and I never actually did it. But that's another decision you're going to have to make, is you really want to put everything out there.
Oh, yeah. Hold it right there!
Okay. So you become a consultant. Next step, your things have grown, you're a little bigger, you're some recognition. I had start making money, and this is the point in my career where I was able to start actually monetizing Nimbits. I was able to start making money with it. Made a lot of mistakes along the way. You know, it's like I did at that point have to partner with somebody with better already contracts and working with other companies than me. Having them out there representing my brand. I really had this desire that I just want to turn all the business parts over to him. Really hard as a founder to separate yourself from like contract negotiations and things like that. But one of the worst scenarios I ended up with was a contract that got me so bound into with a company that their roadmap started to become my roadmap, where I started to have to add features to Nimbits that were very specific to their needs. And I was kind of moving away from my user base. And it was such a binding contract that I started ending up going to like their scrums and stand-ups. And I was like, how did I just end up working here? You know, like this wasn't the dream, you know, and I had extracting myself from that. One of the best contracts I got into were what we call fixed price contracts, which are great if you can do it. And fixed price contracts is where you go to a company and say, I'll deliver this. It's going to check all the boxes you're asking me for, and I'll do it for this much money. And I got a few of them, which were great. And because it's a lot of times it would be something I've built before. I have setup scripts already done. It's really simple. So it's a very honest and on the table thing, just go contract and say, you want this, it's gonna do all these things, you're gonna pay me $30,000 for that thing. And then I log in there one day, run a script and say, here it is, log in. It's great stuff. And they're very happy we support them and stuff. There are ups and downs with being a consultant and contractor. I will say that what's Google's 800 number to call in for help? There isn't one. And you can email at Facebook, for support. So becoming a personal contact to the world to support a product is difficult. I encourage links on your website, whatever, to point people to Stack Exchanges and Reddits and things like that, where there's a community support. At this point, I want to take it back and remember there are people out there who want to hook this up to their fishing, right? And that was the whole reason to get this in the first place. And so getting back to my roots, getting back to my users in the community was a big part of this. This is really coming out here. There's a phenomenon that occurs in writing an IoT platform that I have to stress that I shut Nimbits down, which I'll explain why for good reasons. I shut Nimbits down in 2016, I guess, 2014. These are Google Books search results. There are thousands of books that mention Nimbits, so IoT books about IoT or cloud computing that Nimbits is mentioned. And it doesn't exist anymore. Even if we have the source code, it's ancient, right? It's old Java. We got it. Code that I wrote 20 years ago in some places. I covered it last week, right? And it was based on Google Toolkit. It was based on data nucleus and just some outdated architecture. So the last thing you want to do is try to do Nimbits or tell me what to do. And I found there's a couple different categories of books out there. And the main one, they're still being published today, is use Nimbits as a case study. They know about it, and they talk about the way of connecting Arduinos to the cloud directly and things like that. The other type of books are people who have good intentions and are researching their topic, but not really doing the adequate research to say if maybe the information that they're reading about is out of date. And they are putting tutorials on how to use Nimbits in their books, which are still being published today. My absolute favorite book, I actually bought it, because this is another type of books that are out there. I actually bought it because the foreword specifically thanked me for building Nimbits. And that was so nice. And there was a chapter called Nimbits. And I went to that chapter. It was a complete copy paste of my website. And all my documentation. And down to the typo, right? And down to the HTML error, where it was just showing a bracket on my website, was in the book. Okay, so just complete ripoff. And that's again that lesson that we have our copyrights and we have our no warranty text on top of all of our code, and we have copyrights and licenses. I would say they're impossible to enforce, especially in the global one. Also, if we do this, I can prove this. If you're going to search for Nimbits in Google Books, do Nimbits IoT, so you don't end up with a bunch of Care Bear books. And again, my brand.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Uma Maheshwari, Assistant Professor, Department of Electronics and Communication Engineering. In this video lecture series, I'm going to explain about IoT cloud-based collection, storage, and computing services using Nimbits.
This was made this year. I have a Google or anything mentioned Nimbits on the internet. I get a notification. This is a course curriculum at a university for engineering. You probably don't want to go to, no offense, but this is a video on using Nimbits, and it's not as a case study. It's a lot of money, so it's a good story. Way ahead of schedule, so we're a lot of time for questions. So, why build a passion product? Which is the moral of this whole story. You're way out of that. If you're just starting out, maybe you don't have a great history on your resume of programming gigs. Building that passion project is going to build your resume. When I got hired at Comcast, the interview went from tech screenings and stuff like that to me jumping up and down from the whiteboard, being excited about what I built. And also at the time, having spent 10 years coding Java and being very confident about it. It's a great resume builder. Interviewers love hearing about passion projects. They don't love hearing about passion projects you might be doing while you're working, so they're kind of nice that out. But you start your passion project using a tech stack that you love, right? And you might not be working somewhere where the tech stack at your job is necessarily what you love, but it will set you on that course of one day getting a job where you're working with the tech stack you love. That's actually exactly where I am now. I do a lot of code. These at Comcast, they don't get the code that much because we're doing stuff like this. But I get to code in Kotlin. I get to build Android. I get to work in Kotlin on the platform, or Dora. And that is that us starting a passion project was the reason I was able to go from VB.NET to getting my first Java gig to getting my first Android gig, which I didn't see coming. I just got a contract doing some Android work. Then transitioned to Kotlin, and now doing Kotlin multi-platform. So you can make money doing it. It's also great when you form an LLC, and that's a very important decision to make at some point when your user base grows and your blast radius increases. Your risk of having a legal issue it grows more and more. Again, I kind of heard forming an S corp, but you form an LLC, and then you move the project from the cool things about you in your resume to your job history, because you worked at an LLC building all this great stuff. And you see that little resume a lot. It says founder CEO. You know, yeah, like I work at Starbucks, and then I was a founder and CEO. But you kind of have to word it that way, to be honest. Kind of coincidentally, when I took the job at Comcast, I did decide it's time to shut Nimbits down. Usage was going way down. There were a lot of technology stacks out there that were better. And Amazon and Google on their cloud services had something way better. So I beat them to the punch, but this happens a lot. I would have been remiss in suggesting somebody use Nimbits at that time in 2016 because there were better alternatives. And it's a real lesson I wanted to bring here that you start a passion project and work on it for 10 years, like I did. And then it's okay to walk away and not feel like it was a failure because it got you where you want to be. It got you on that journey. So that's why I shut it down. It's now part of the GitHub archive. And I really like the last thing, and I'm sorry, I really want to way ahead of time, so I could just sit and hang on to you guys and ask that question. But Nimbits put me on the stage, right? Yeah. So that's thank you for that. I'm happy to talk about anything except Comcast products and all that. If you'll be so long, you can go and talk about my products. But if you have a passion project you want to share, I'd love to hear about it or any other questions. You guys want anything I said over to.
How do you navigate, especially if you're working for an employer and you start a passion project, especially if you're already in tech, how do you separate those two
Great. You asked, and to be honest. And there is, so depending on your company, I think if you're working somewhere and you're like, hey, my lunch breaks or whatever, or I want to settle develop with spot time, I want to work on this little product, and you get permission. And even at Comcast, we have a whole open, we're actually, one of the requirements to be a DE at Comcast is to have peer-reviewed work, and I checked that box off by submitting a patent, submitted a patent, big one for me, but the open source as a working in open source is peer-reviewed work, and it checks that box for me. So, but your HR should, and or your employer or whatever, can give you the okay to set aside a little bit of time on that project. And for me also, this is some Comcast information, but if you have an idea and you think it's a great idea, but it's not necessarily related to your company, there's a form I fill out and I say, this is my idea. And there's a checkbox that says, if this isn't approved as an idea for the Comcast idea that we're going to allow, do you plan to work on this on your own? And you click yes. And because a lot of times the idea isn't part of the business model of the people you work for, right? And you can, so there's caveats in working on something on your own, on your company issue laptop. You just need to play it. But I feel very comfortable talking about open source projects with my coworkers.
And it's the same thing if you're joining a new company, you have to announce all that stuff.
You did
And
better.
get-
I did a contract and I had a job. I only stayed after 4 months, so I wasn't very happy there. But one of the big things was I was kind of like my lunch break and I was working on something and a project manager asked me, like, what the hell are you working on? And it was all math, right? And I was like, hey, this is how I can get the brain here. And I work on my passion projects and I'm able to get to work. That's your decision if you want to work with us like that. Is there a microphone that goes to the
No, Mike.
I'll just yell. So my passion project war story, I wrote a dial-up IP SLIP implementation for the NEXT computer way back in the early 90s. If you wander upstairs, you can see one. And it was a freemium thing, and for $35 you could get the premium version that did something different, which I forget now. But after a while, I decided to sort of stop selling that and supporting it. Years later, we're getting into Y2K, and I start getting support email requests wanting the Y2K certification for the software I sold you for $35, 8 years before.
It comes back, like I said, if your project makes it out there, they sometimes say this never done. I don't even own the Nimbits.com domain anymore. And so I'm just kind of like distance myself from that, but yeah, it's never really is. That's all we're here. Yep, it does.
Did you consider trying to find another maintainer for the project, or did you feel like the product where it was at in the stack was just probably not recommended in general by you?
It really was it was the competitors that came out, the kind of need, it was good. Anybody here ever worked with Google Web Toolkit, which was Google's attempt at building, cross-compiling Java into JavaScript and web pages, And I thought that was the big thing. I thought it was going to be everything. And so the entire big thing was that with all that stack. The decisions I made, it just in time because it was the stack was going in the wrong direction. I think that if anything, slicing it up, like the calculation engine, I'm actually quite proud of. And I might one day port that logic to Kotlin and put it into a little library people can import. But I don't think I probably would have wished that could have based on my work on the right now. There's a question behind you.
Similar, it was a similar question.
What do you use now to automate your querying?
Hmm?
What do you use now to automate your querying?
So yeah, I rewrote a lot of this stuff, but it's Raspberry Pi. And I love building, that's what I love building on Kotlin as a platform, on Raspberry Pi development, which we're Piper J and the libraries. Yeah, I track this big custom built 300 gallon freshwater aquarium that's all kind of like the bottom of the pond. And so it's pH, temperatures, make sure the heaters are on, making sure how much money I'm spending on the current, all that stuff. But not, I don't think I'm going to go into the aquarium automation business anything. A chicken coop, now that's,
So how do you recommend monetizing open source projects?
yeah, good question. Good question. So I kind of covered it. Consulting was a big one, and in consulting was pretty much all my income from this came from consulting work. And so people can use your software, but then so it's kind of like the Red Hat or those models where people are going to use it, or you're going to pay for support. Because I did have some ongoing support contracts. I think one of the hardest things for me was trying to figure out how to charge like Google does for I have customers set up a budget and charge them by API use, and that kind of broke me because I at the time didn't really have a way to do that. So Google could charge me for the cloud computing resources, but I had no way to kind of get my customers to go through that. And even today, there are third-party platforms that do just that. They'll sit between you and your cloud platform and manage those accounts. And that's probably would be the way to go for developing a new cloud platform. But if I could have monetized via a API request billing, like doing like hundreds per penny, for requests sort of thing. That could have gone a completely different direction. It could have actually become a much larger thing. But like I said, monetizing is the hard part.
Yep.
So, funny enough, I've worked on some enterprise stuff where we actually managed how to, or figured out how to manage that. Have you ever worked with Effigy before? And if you would do another open source project that you wanted to monetize, would you do something like that where you could monetize per API call or block of API calls?
Yeah, that's what I was saying. At
Yeah.
the time, I didn't have it. And yeah, I think that's the business model.
Okay.
But again, it's hard because they're getting a slice of the pie, and they're telling you, they say, considering like getting off the big cloud and self-hosting and trying to build some way to monetize or charge or a PayPal for subscriptions. There's other avenues around that, but they've gotten so good at draining our wallets at Amazon and Google for computing resources, and now we're only moving the way to effectively pass that on to our customers directly without taking another bite out of us. But yeah, and I haven't worked with this for a while, so maybe there's somebody who has a better answer than I do. Feel free to comment.
But I guess what you're saying is if you're going to monetize it, build a business plan.
Exactly, and that's how I want to make money from this thing. Don't build it first and then say how I can make money from this thing. Right? What's your vision? I definitely didn't have one for Nimbits for 5 years ago. Right?
Because we're technologists.
Yeah.
We want to play first and then figure out a business model after.
Exactly. The code works. It's cool. I really the ability to take really going through sensor data, filter it out, clean it up locally, get it onto your own service, and then have what the data that actually matters, make it into the cloud where you're actually being charged. Was part of the magic behind Nimbits. But even the Arduino libraries and SDKs have those same filters and engines built into them as well. So you have all these multiple layers of cleaning up your data, because the challenge was, especially with Google and Data Nucleus, it's like the data is coated in gold. It's like once you get into those databases, it's expensive to get them out, and that's what. So the part of the reason to use Nimbits was to minimize the amount of data you actually put in, going somewhere extensively. Yeah.
Anything else?
So do you have a new passion project then that you're working on?
Yeah, nothing like a platform like this. Part of my job is as DE, I'm encouraged to work with open source projects. So I do some contributions to K-Tour, K-Tour, right? Common guys, how's that, K-Tour? Working on this cool project and getting, you go to my GitHub, I have ADHD means that I have 80 repos that are nothing, right? I have 20 domains. But there's a project in my GitHub called Cobalt, and it is it leverages K-Tour's type-safe routing for web routes and uses KSP to do code generation and auto-generate the routing. And so that's like a plugin for K-Tour. That's what I've been spending my weekends on right now. There's also a project I've been working on called TapTracks, which is a journaling program that's designed to connect sensor data to your journal. So if I'm journaling my aquarium and what cheese I'm making, and I can see next to what I'm journaling what the effect of the pH was, for example. So it's like data-based journaling. And that's called TapTracks, and that's in open source. And actually, it's a good example where it's partially open source, and I did decide to I want to keep part of it proprietary. Because I think it's a good idea. Back?
You addressed making money in open source and the sort of way that can work while you're employed by some other company and filing these forms. But for younger people, students who maybe just want to do an open source project and don't necessarily want to profit from it, do you have advice for what they should look into in terms of like legal aspects, what sort of research they should do, what resources they should look for, or would you not really concern yourself with that?
I mean, I'm asking you to give me legal advice at stage. It's only fair, but this is not legal advice, but there are a lot of safeguards out there to protect you as a student or a hobbyist. Especially just going along with GitHub.com and creating a public repo and learning about licensing, and the different types of licenses that are out there, like Apache 2. So that says you can use this for whatever you want. There's some really restrictive licensing which saying that, hey, you can only use my code if you open source your code. And you can get you can use the wrong license or get the wrong license. But there's those things you see everywhere. It's the copyright at the top of your code, the warranty blurb. And then again, expect that if you're the best solution to the problem you're trying to solve, the people will come to you for that code. So that risk of somebody just like copying your project, they're probably not as good as a programmer as you, and you'll always end up back on your doorstep. And that was the big thing for me, where people were stealing Nimbits and doing a find replace and replacing the names and everything, stripping out all the copyrights, and then selling it on the website as their proprietary solution, and they never succeeded, ever.
Yeah, another take on that question is, if you're a student, or even if you're not, and you've been engaged in writing open source or whatever your passion projects are at home, keep a list, and when you start with a new employer, usually as part of the onboarding process and all those forms that nobody ever reads but really should, where you acknowledge it's work for hire and everything you create belongs to the company, there's usually a place to disclose existing intellectual property. My disclosures are like 5 or 7 pages long of every possible thing I've thought of or worked on. It doesn't hurt to just spew everything out there, so down the road, if you continue to work on your version of the aquarium automation, that doesn't somehow run afoul of the company deciding to go into the aquarium business, right?
Exactly. And you will, and that was that role in the presentation, that be transparent and honest, and you don't try to hide that from your employer. And that if you're a great company and you say, but hey, I'll take this job, but I want to keep working on my little side project over here, if they're a good company, they're going to say okay, because they want you, So and then just make sure you follow the rules, and don't use your company laptop. for non-business, they do watch, depending on who you are. I hope that answers your question. So,
Hey, so I'm curious, as a systems engineer, not a software engineer, I wanted to, what kind of personal projects really make a systems engineer look better? It's not that I don't code, so.
I'm not a software engineer, but, I mean, like, I guess, I do build my own systems, and I also have my own models and stuff, and the, automation seems to be the first thing that comes to mind, building automation tools and scripts, whatever you, even something that takes 5 minutes to do your job, spend 2 weeks on automating it, you know, and it's worth it, because we're not gonna do the same 5-minute task price, we're too busy for software engineers to have it. Yeah, but I have to know what goes out here, so for sure, sure.
Anything else?
In the back?
So the sensor journaling thing, have you let generative AI write your comments on it yet?
No, I use generative AI like crazy. I have a long running locally on my Windows dedicated GPU at home. I've worked in the generative AI space professionally, which is new for me. I've entered into that world. I have ChatGPT windows open next to me all the time, and use it and GitHub. It's really interesting. I really don't like the ChatGPT, but I'm only rooted to GitHub Copilot. You know, it's just yelling at my ID and thanking ChatGPT in the browser. But from my relationship with the way I work, and I do not buy code. And typically I'll sometimes have Copilot open with making suggestions. I do like it when I'm writing documentation, as far as it will just suggest an entire accurate piece of documentation. I like going back on coding problems. I've never said, write me Kotlin that does something and have it then copy and paste it out of the generative AI. I have, it's kind of like a systems thing, I use generative AI to write scripts all the time. And say, and I read them, I understand what they're doing. But but when I say, I like to say like, write me a script that backs up this thing over here, and SSH just SCPs it over to this other server and does one of those stuff. And okay, well, I very rarely am going to type out a bash script for my Linux box. If I can just ask the video, I mean, I can do it, and it looks really good to me, but not my code. Okay. What was the question about documenting code?
More like letting a generative AI be a contributor, like a team member, sharing the journal with you, either giving perspective of the sensor data as if just looking at it, or even just interacting kind of like a Jarvis would, looking at your notes and the sensor data to say, oh, I'm noticing this trend.
So you're asking, would I integrate generative AI into the journaling thing? Absolutely.
Not make it responsive for it, make it a part.
Part of it, absolutely. And I actually already have a little in the prototypes of, and really about like being able to add a feature that says, I'd like my journal to have these structure and these fields, and have it create the UI for it, your personalized UI for your journal entries. Things like that. They're very controlled by. I take the generative AI feedback, and so I usually will say to my prompts, the Gen AI will usually be based on the information you have, return me one of these enums, and I will take the enum and use that to drive the UI. I won't have it actually create, and let what it's giving back direct access to the user experience. Yes.
So I'm not sure I understand all this completely, and if it's inappropriate for your talk, let me know. This is a question I have, and what you were talking about brings us up. It's appeared to me, if I'm using some of these tools, AI tools, and you enter information in there, that information, that AI engine, and maybe others could use and keep as their own as part of their repository. And if that's true, then I would assume one have to be careful what you share with that, even as part of exploration, because now you're bidding under IP. Is that, am I thinking correctly here?
It's true, especially with, so what we're talking about in this context, it is really close to the microphone. Well, I'm talking about my hobby projects, right? And I don't care. AI use at Comcast is extremely restricted. There's a huge amount of legal around it, and definitely not allowing generated AI code into any production code because we didn't play it, right? And so our stuff's proprietary. We go in a whole different rabbit hole. But yeah, if you're using one of these generative AIs, you're contributing to another company's product, right? That's the thing. So I would tread lightly, right?
Yes.
Jason?
I feel like a recurring sort of subject around Internet of Things is also some security concerns. So do you have any important anecdotes or just strong opinions in that sort of space, or is it something you've managed to not think about too much?
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't, when I use a product and they say like log into Google, right? I tend to do it and I don't remember really when I actually do that on one of my own products, right? I'm very familiar with OpenID and OAuth flows and things like that. I'm very comfortable with building my own logging environment. You know, there's considerations as far as like use forward-only encryption when storing user data. Forward-only encryption means that it can't be decrypted into the original value. All you can do is prove that the submitted value will encrypt into the same value. So you think, let's say I want to store an email address that I never do. I would say you take your email address string, you add a salt to it, which makes it more random. You can then encrypt with the combination of salt, and email. And that forward-only encryption means if the customer comes back and enters their email and password, let's say, I can confirm that those can be encrypted to those strings, but they do never actually unencrypt them. And so it's kind of outrageous when you see your email got stolen from some company and you're like, why is my email stored in my context? Or the reverse way. You know, with that, I recommend learning things like OpenID. There's a great OpenID login open source libraries that get with it. OpenID's authentication GitHub repos that do things like handle OAuth and token exchanges and things like that. And besides that, I like to say that they like encrypt everything, you know, no user data, and then importantly, don't try to build your own security stack with a better one if you want to actually already exist, it's better, right? So be careful with that. Great question. That's a whole thing. I'll come back and do another talk.
Okay.
Guys, this is great. Thank you so much.